A day in October 1966. A helicopter brought a special patient to a U.S. military hospital in An Khê, then part of Quy Nhơn City. This was an unforgettable day for military doctor Sam Assarat. A northern Vietnamese soldier had been shot. He had contracted gangrene on 2/3 of his right arm after 3 days of floating down a stream. The soldier was lucky because he got sent to a kind-hearted U.S. military doctor who decided to amputate his injured arm to save his life. A year later, Dr. Assarat said goodbye to the war and returned to the U.S. He brought with him the arm bone of the northern Vietnamese soldier and kept it at his home in Houston, Texas. Over 40 years later, the doctor recalled memorable story again. He decided to return to Vietnam and give the arm bones to its rightful owner. And that was how the 74-year-old former military doctor started the search for his peace of mind.
Hello and nice to see you again on Talk Vietnam. As you've just seen in the video, you might already guess who our guest is today. It's actually former military American doctor, Dr. Sam Assarat, and he's right here in Vietnam for a very special mission, because it's this mission that he hopes is going to give him closure to the war and also give him a peace of mind for the rest of his life. And we're happy to have him in our studio today to share with us some of his stories as well as his mission. And you might find some of these stories a little bit bizarre. But it's through these stories we can clearly see the humanity that's existent both during wartime and peacetime. So let's welcome Dr. Sam Assarat into the studio. Hello, how are you? Welcome to the studio.
Well,
thank you so much
very
for being here.
It's a pleasure to meet you and to be part of this program.
So my first question that I would want to ask you is that don't you think it's a little bit bizarre to keep an amputated arm skeleton as a war memento right after the war?
Well, it is unusual, but I never considered it a memento of war.
Mm-hmm.
Nor did I consider it a souvenir to be brought home. It was really something very special to me, and at the time that these events took place, the fact that I had the arm with me when I returned back to the United States at the time, it was inappropriate for me to throw it away.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't even come to my mind. And I put it in my military trunk, and it came home with me, and I've had it since I returned to the United States in 1967.
1967. So tell us a little bit about your meeting with whom? Who was the Vietnamese soldier that you met in 1966? What was the story back then?
Well, and I think it was October of 1966. The medevac helicopter had found him, picked him up, and brought him in to our unit. We were considered a medical company, but we were really a forward mobile kind of surgical hospital, so we were equipped to do anything. And so when he came in, it was obviously he was an extremely ill man, and his arm was shot. He was shot in the right arm here, and from here down, the arm was just really completely dead, and for lack of a better word, it was rotting off.
Mm-hmm.
Really didn't have any. There was no Vietnamese hospital to send him to, so therefore I made the decision that we would take care of him. And therefore, we did the amputation, and that's how he came to be a patient in our forward area.
Mm-hmm. Now, your facility, I assume, because you were an American facility, you probably took care of American soldiers. Why did you decide to take care of a Vietnamese person?
My rule was that whoever came off the helicopter, we were going to take care of, period. I don't care where they came from. We were a group of physicians and a group of medics, about 120 enlisted men who were all medics. Mm-hmm. That our job was healing. We were not combatants.
Exactly.
So I didn't make a distinction of really who was a friendly and who was an enemy. When they came in, they were a patient.
Mm-hmm.
and we were obligated to take care of them as best as we could, and that's what we did for Hung. He was a patient. He's somebody I had helped, and at a very appropriate time. Had he not made it there at that time, he would have died within weeks.
To know a little bit about how the relationship between you two developed.
He told us he was a backpacker. In other words, he was taking supplies. But it turned out, as I learned recently, that he was a soldier. He was not just a packer, but equipment person. But he was a squad leader.
Exactly.
And of course, I knew then what had happened is when the squad got trapped. And all his buddies were shot and killed. When he was shot, he was standing near a river, and he fell in the river, and he went floating downstream, and that's how he really got away. And now, in terms of my relationship with him, he probably thought we were going to turn him into the authorities so that he would end up in a prison somewhere, and that I think the medics even asked him to help them, and he felt he felt useful, and he made himself at home because he was happier to be there than where he thought he was going, and so it just turned out that way until the new forward commander calls me up to his tent one day, and he says to me, "Axelrod, I hear you have an enemy soldier down there." I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "How long?" He said, "How long has he been there?" I said, "Been there several months." He says, "Well, good. You have 24 hours to get rid of him."
Oh, wow. What did you do afterwards?
I had absolutely no reservations of what I was going to do. By the time I got to our company area, I talked to the medevac pilot, and I said, "Look, you need to take us to our base camp," which was near Anke, a few miles, and he flew us there. And then I took him over to the local Vietnamese medical clinic and got him a job as a one-armed clerk and a little medic. And they had no reservations about taking him, and that way I just knew he had a place to eat and a place to sleep.
Right. I think it's amazing that, in such a period of war, in such a battlefield, there's people coming in to basically destroy people, but there's also people like you who come in to basically save lives. And I think that was our job. It's amazing.
My job.
Yeah. So let's go to our next question. So you brought the skeletal keepsake back to America as the reminder of what you did in Vietnam. Do you often take it out to look at it or remember the times that you were in Vietnam, or did you just forget about it for some time?
Maybe the first 20 years I didn't take it out, but in the last 20 years it sat at my desk. I didn't play with it. It stayed in the bag. In fact, I don't know that I really maybe took it out until this recent times, but it did remind me, and it was it has something special about it, and it's almost like I was keeping it company. Now that I think about it, or it was keeping me company, and that's hard to explain.
That's interesting.
There's a presence about that. It's sort of intuitive.
I see. So was that intuition something that brought you to Vietnam to try to find the owner of that arm?
About 2 years ago, I opened up my military trunk for the first time in 35 plus years, and in there, what was in there just blew me away. I forgot that I had a lot of documents. The little tag that Hung was on him, I had it. Had forgotten about it. there were 100 slides, and I had them converted to photographs.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went through that, other memories came back, and there were those photographs of Hung.
Exactly.
When he was injured, when we were operating on him, and then after when he was healed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at that time I said, well, it's time to go back.
Uh-huh.
And so for a couple of years I thought about it and then planned it. And I decided I was going to take my 2 sons and my grandson with me, and the guys' trip, so we would go back and visit some of the places that were the landing zones where I was, and share some of the experience with them.
After you returned to the U.S. from the Vietnam battlefield, how did you feel back then?
I really didn't give it a whole lot of thought at that time. Mm-hmm. Now, I have feelings about it now because I've done a lot of research.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my thoughts about the war today, there'd be a lot of people who wouldn't, in the United States, who wouldn't maybe like what I said.
Mm-hmm.
We had no business being here.
Mm-hmm.
I took care of a lot of children. That has bothered me the most. That when these children came off those helicopters and they were separated from their parents, and their parents were not going to be found. Mm-hmm. So after we got them well, if they were burned or treated or injured, or had 3 types of malaria, then we had to find a place for them to go. And that was very difficult for me, that part of the whole war. Mm-hmm. And based upon my research, and we look back, we absolutely, quite frankly, had no business being here. Mm-hmm. All right, the Vietnamese people, be frank about it, they wanted to be free of all these countries.
Right.
When President Truman had opportunities, things would have been totally different. He didn't do it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's what took place, and and what's happened to Vietnam today, quite frankly, I'm absolutely amazed at how well things have gone in spite of us.
We've come a long way.
Come a long way.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
It's a beautiful country.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you so much for coming back, for returning to this country.
Anyway.
After nearly half a century, Dr. Sam Axelrad had a chance to finally reunite with Hung. And they reunited at Hung's place right in An Khê in the central province highland of Gia Lai. So let's take a closer look at this reunion.
When I first saw him as we were coming up the path here, it was like I actually hadn't seen a long-lost brother for all these years, and was so deeply appreciative just to see him and be here with him. That alone was worth walking up the trail here. It was very emotional.
Finally, after 45 years, Dr. Sam Axelrad was reunited with Nguyễn Quang Hùng, the former North Vietnamese soldier whose arm he amputated.
No, it's not that beautiful.
He's a doctor, Buxy.
The most important ceremony in the reunion happened right after Dr. Axelrad took a seat. He gave the skeletal arm back to Hùng. They first met when they were just 27 years old. Now, at the age of 74, they recalled memories through photographs. Hùng still remembered clearly how he was shot in 1966 and received treatment from Dr. Axelrad.
Lính chúng tôi bị thương thì có 2-3 người vậy đó thôi. Nhưng mà người ta phải để cách ly ra, mỗi nơi mỗi người, chứ không thể nói chuyện với nhau được. Cái thời gian đấy là không nói chuyện được. Nhưng mà bây giờ thì thời gian đầu thì mình vào là tù binh mà, thì cũng phải còng chân rồi các thứ cũng phải đi, tiểu cũng phải có người đưa đi chứ, đâu có phải mình tự do được. Thì bác sĩ Sam chỉ là chăm sóc cho mình, rồi truyền nước, rồi truyền máu.
Dr. Sam Axelrad considers himself the custodian Hung's arm born over the past 40 years. He decided to return to Vietnam and give the skeletal arm back to its rightful owner. Sam saw this as a mission that he had to accomplish.
This reunion has special meaning for me, that I had a mission that really began 3 years ago, and that mission was to return the skeleton of his arm to him so that it would allow him to have the ability, as he expressed it, to be buried whole. And that's just a very hard to describe feeling.
At the reunion, Hung thanked Dr. Sam Asirat for his kindness towards him and his family.
Cuộc gặp đây này hội ngộ giữa gia đình bác sĩ Sam với gia đình tôi, với bản thân tôi thì nó là một cái cuộc gọi là tình nghĩa, đồng thời nó là một cái ơn nghĩa rất là cao sao, bởi vì đây là hai dân tộc khác nhau, hoặc bên kia chiến tuyến, bên đây thì đó là đúng một cái tình cảm, nhưng mà đây là nó một cái tình cảm con người với con người.
Chris Asirat, Sam's 42-year-old acupuncturist son, felt that witnessing the reunion between his father and Hung was like watching history happen.
Two men who were good friends in a very difficult time, who became friends even though they were on different sides. And I think also it's a testament to the human spirit. You know, even when there's a war happening and people are fighting, that there's still the human spirit, the heart. And my father and Hung, they had a connection somehow with the heart. And now here we are 45 years later, back in Vietnam, and they haven't seen each other for 45 years. It's just amazing. It's an amazing feeling to see that.
Let's now talk about when you returned the safekeep to Hung. So you said you were unbelievably happy to have been able to return the wartime safekeep to its rightful owner. Why were you so happy or elated during that time?
Well, as you know, one of the messages that he gave the reporters when they first talked to him is that he was happy to know that it was coming back. Mm-hmm. That he was, and they said why, and his answer was, so I could be buried whole. Mm-hmm. Those were his thoughts, and the fact that that he was found thanks to Wa, and therefore we had the opportunity to come back and see him, meet with him, and be with him was an amazing event for me personally. And gave me a lot of a sense of very deep satisfaction that he really, in spite of his arm being blown off, being amputated, and in spite of the experiences of being being away from home, he has had what I would consider a very successful life. Mm-hmm. And obviously, he married somebody. He passed away a couple of months ago, but. He had 7 children, and they all are doing well, and he's got beautiful grandchildren, and we had a chance to be with them, mm-hmm. and that was there's nothing like that.
And let's talk about your first journey 2 years ago to Vietnam, and you didn't manage to find Mr. Hung at that time,
right?
And you only managed to find him this time. So let's talk about that time when you didn't find him. What happened?
Well, we were at the Metropole Hotel here in Hanoi. And I noticed that we noticed that they did a tour of an underground bunker. So we took the tour. Mm-hmm. And the tour guide spoke very good English, and she told us about the hotel, about the bunker. And so I was talking to the tour guide and shown her a photograph of me and Hung with his arm when I was 27 and he was 27. And all of a sudden she gets very excited, and she informed us that she was a journalist and was only a tour guide on occasion.
Oh, wow.
And we just happened to be there when she was there. And after that, after communicating back and forth from the United States and here with Wa, she wrote a story, and it went up and down the country. And that's when I think the brother-in-law of Hung saw the picture.
I see.
And he called his brother-in-law to let him know, and that's when they called the paper. So that's a unique experience.
So you came to Vietnam for the first time, not in the hopes of actually finding Hung, but then coincidentally you had somebody who was willing to put your story.
I was only inquiring of her.
Exactly.
Does she have any suggestions on how I can find his family? All right, because what I've been thinking about for the past year, if he didn't survive, I would get it to his family. That was our goal at the time.
Exactly.
Not really knowing what happened to him. And then when we learned that he was alive and thriving where where I left him, and he was smart enough to stay there. Good decision.
It's also easier for you to find him too.
And that was we saw a lot of the country.
Exactly.
But that was sort of an epic moment for all of us.
Right.
And we've been talking about it since then, to tell you the truth.
I see. So does your family have a role to play, in your success of finding Mr. Hung?
Yes. I think that both my sons and my son Chris and my son Larry, and at the first time with my little grandson Owen, during the communication this year with Y, they were very helpful in setting up this whole event.
Right.
That's happening now.
In our studio today, we actually have two of Dr. Sam's sons, and they're right here today to talk to us a little bit about their journey with him in the process of finding Hung. So hi, Chris and Larry.
Hi.
So tell me a little bit about how your father had longed for the reunion with Mr. Hung, and why did he want it that much, according to your opinions? Let's start with Chris.
Well, I think that probably when he left here, there wasn't any closure. Everything was done in a rush, and I'm sure that he had a fondness for Mr. Hung, but wasn't able to really take care of him the way he probably wanted to. So I think that probably for all these years, he thought about it, was always in the back of his mind. Exactly. And just wanting to know what happened, mostly probably just wanting to know what happened to him.
Exactly, exactly. What about you, Larry?
I think in the terms of emotional healing and just the mere fact of giving his arm bones back and to be able to share that with him through the trip last year and then finally with the closure of the trip this year has been very helpful. It's been a bonding moment for the family, and I think it's offered a lot of healing and closure for Sam as well.
That's perfect. So how did you feel when witnessing the reunion between your father and Mr. Hung, Chris?
I've never felt that way before. It was such a happy moment, and I think that for me it was a moment of seeing my father happier than probably I've ever seen him. I mean, I just saw a smile on his face, and the way that he walked up and hugged Mr. Hung, and then he grabbed his hand, and they were just walking hand in hand back up to Mr. Hung's house. I knew that my father had really just found a moment of peace and a moment of completion for himself. It was unbelievable to watch that. It was unbelievable to be a part of that.
What do you think the reunion meant to both of them, both Hung and also Sam, your father?
Well, I think each of them, once we were there, I think it became clear that Hung, once he saw Dad, was very happy to see him, and probably had thought about my father many times over the years as well, and wondered about certain things. And I think for both of them, it was just a very happy reunion of two. It ended up, like my dad said earlier, it ended up not being about the bones at all. It was just about a reunion of two friends that hadn't seen each other for many, many years. Exactly. And I even walked up to my dad while we were there, and I said, it's funny, I'm watching you guys. It's almost like, it's like you just saw each other yesterday. The way that they just immediately started talking, and they just seemed so comfortable in each other's presence, and I could see how they really developed a true friendship back then.
With regards to your search for Hung, there's somebody that's definitely that's helped you a lot, and that's Miss Chen Quỳnh Hoa, and she's right here in our studio as well. So let's
she's
talk
the
to her a
whole
little
reason
bit.
this happened.
She's the whole reason this happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's the communications officer for the International Labour Organization. Am I correct? And she's helped you find Mr. Hung, and she's also the translator during the process as well. So let's talk to her a little bit in Vietnamese. I'm going to be talking in Vietnamese. So, ok, em chào chị Hoa, em cảm ơn chị hôm nay đã đến chương trình. Chị là một cái người đã đồng hành với bác sĩ Sam trong cả quá trình tìm bác Hùng như thế này. Thì theo chị, thì khi mà bác sĩ gặp được bác Hùng và lúc trước và lúc sau, thì cái tâm trạng của bác khác nhau như thế nào?
Tôi là người đã đi cùng bác sĩ Sam khi mà bác đến Việt Nam ngày đầu tiên trong cái năm nay, thì tôi cũng cảm nhận rõ là bác thật sự là rất là hồi hộp. Bác cảm giác như là bác cũng không ngủ được, và bất kể lúc nào cũng hỏi về việc gia đình bác Hùng đã biết chưa, có biết là bác đến không, và bác Hùng có đầy đủ các con cháu ở đấy chưa, để bác rất là muốn gặp các con các cháu của bác Hùng ở đó, rồi là bác có khỏe không, rồi bác cũng hỏi về vợ của bác Hùng trước đây mất như thế nào. Và sau khi bác Sam gặp được bác Hùng ở trên Gia Lai, thì tôi cảm thấy rõ là như là chị và các bạn cũng thấy là bác thật sự là rất là nhẹ nhõm, và bác đã hoàn thành được một trong những cái, bác nói là một trong những cái nhiệm vụ lớn ở trong cuộc đời của bác, đó là giao trả lại được cái cánh tay cho cái người chủ đích thực của nó.
Là một cái người cũng là người chứng kiến trực tiếp cái quá trình hội ngộ này, thì chị có những cảm giác gì, chị có những cảm nhận gì?
Thật sự là rất là xúc động, và tôi nghĩ là đấy là một cái câu chuyện có một không hai. Và tôi là một người ở trong thế hệ sinh ra và lớn lên sau chiến tranh, cho nên tôi cũng nghe nói rất là nhiều về chiến tranh, về những cái gì mà đau thương còn lại. Thế nhưng mà trên thực tế thì đây là một cái câu chuyện về lòng nhân đạo, về tình người, về tình nhân văn, và tôi thật sự là cũng không biết nói gì, bởi vì là cái giây phút đấy xúc động lắm, nhìn thấy hai bác ôm nhau mãi rồi là nắm tay nhau. Đấy cũng không phải là, đấy thực sự không phải là cái văn hóa của người Việt Nam, nhưng mà bác Hùng thật sự là bác ôm bác Sam này suốt, và cầm tay nhau đi suốt cả một quãng đường dài, vào từ đầu ngõ vào bên trong, và ở trong nhà cũng vẫn cứ ôm nhau suốt và cầm tay nhau nói chuyện, rồi mắt thì rơm rớm nước mắt. Và đúng là như là hai người bạn rất là thân thiết, và lâu lắm mới gặp lại được nhau. Và tôi nghĩ rằng đó là một cái kết thúc thực sự là có hậu của một cái câu chuyện rất là đặc biệt về cánh tay này. Và tôi cũng thấy rằng là tôi cũng rất là mừng là những cái gì đọng lại về cái cuộc chiến đau thương ấy, lại là những cái gì mà nhân đạo nhất.
Em cảm ơn chị rất là nhiều. During his trip back to Vietnam this time, his second trip back to Vietnam, Dr. Axelrad was accompanied by his 2 sons and his 2 grandchildren. And during this time, they actually visited the country that was once their enemy. Let's take a closer look.
The water puppetry village of Dao Thuc, located 30 kilometers from Hanoi, is holding a special show for Sam, his 2 sons, and 2 grandchildren. This is the first time the American visitors have watched water puppetry. Young and old, they're all amazed by the performances. The folk art has helped Larry, son of Dr. Sam Axelrad, understand more about Vietnam.
The puppets are very intricate, and the interaction between the puppets is very nice. And I really enjoyed the way that they use a lot of the Vietnamese culture, the water buffalo, the fish, and they incorporate all these characteristics into that makes it very nice and a very wonderful experience for Vietnamese culture.
Located by Ca Lo River in the Ngoan district, in the outskirts of Hanoi, the water puppetry troupe from Dao Thuc village has guarded its folk art for nearly 300 years. The special thing about Dao Thuc water puppetry is that the stage is set up on a beautiful pond surrounded by trees. Accompanied by traditional chant tunes, the performances feature artists standing in the water behind bamboo screens to control the puppets using bamboo sticks and strings. The show, which includes 10 stories, lasts for almost an hour. Today's audience really like it. But they are probably even more excited to go backstage and explore the puppets and stories they have just watched. This is an unforgettable experience for Sam and his family.
I'm enjoying this show tremendously because it's amazing to me how they bring the puppets out of the water. They're very talented and my family is enjoying it. This is very special for me to share this with my children, my two boys and their two children, because it will, the whole time we've been here is an experience of a lifetime for them. And I hope it will stay with them and they can pass this down to their children, and I know they will.
Let's talk a little bit about your trip this time, something that's very merry. You're accompanied this time by your family, your two sons, as well as your two grandchild. So why did you decide to bring all of them here this time?
We shared an experience together last year, and this was, that to me, as far as I was concerned, that was part one of two parts. When I told them what was being planned, they were just anxious to come with me. And my little grandkids, same thing. You know, for them, it's an experience of a lifetime. This is what this has become for all of us.
Exactly.
And, you know, it's just something that doesn't happen it won't happen again.
Right.
All right. And as long as it helps them, my two grandkids, this will be something that they'll take with them the rest of their life. And for me, that's important. That there'll be a time when they'll have their own kids.
Right. Memorable experiences
Memorable
don't need to happen a lot of times. It just needs to happen that one time. And it stays with you forever.
They can sit down and tell them a story that they were part of.
Exactly. Exactly. So after the war, have you ever returned to Vietnam before 2 years ago?
No.
Okay.
Last year was the first, this is the second.
And do you see any changes in Vietnam ever since the war, and also, you know, from last year to this year as well?
Well, I was amazed at how beautiful this country is. But this time I had a chance to really see the people and see the whole country. And it just blows me away, you know, and it's very pleasing to me. Know that there are 4 million mopeds going to work.
Every morning.
Every morning, all right.
That's our rush hour. We have a rush hour of mopeds.
Right, and that they really enjoy working. And I learned something last year because Owen wanted Kentucky Fried Chicken. And so we went across the lake, where it's KFC,
right?
And he had his fried chicken. We even found him a place to have a real cheeseburger. And at the KFC, there was a young man who was cleaning the tables. And so I went up to him. I said, talked to him. He spoke a little bit of English, and I asked him why he was working. He said he was a student in a language school, translating Chinese and Vietnamese. All right?
Yes.
And he told me that he was working to buy a book, a special book, a language book. And I said, how much does it cost? He said, $25. So I left him a $25 tip. All right? And then the next morning he shows up at the hotel with his book. He was so excited.
That's amazing.
All right. So, what I learned from that is that I really think the Vietnamese tradition here is that you educate the poor better than we do in the United States. Honest to God, because they track them along a vocation. As I understand, if they don't pick the vocations, central government will find one for you. All right, but you know, it's important to work and help take care of each other's families, which that hadn't changed. I mean, it's a family culture.
Yes, it is a
family culture. It hadn't changed. It's probably the best in the world. And so that was my observations.
So Dr. Sam, after all that you've done for home back in the day and also during the present time, what do you wish that others can gain from this experience?
You know, I'm Jewish, and one of our tradition is about we have an obligation to repair the world. All right, and I think there's a lesson here to learn that when there's somebody in need, all right, if you do a deed of loving kindness, it comes back, and it'll return to you in some form or another, and it has many times over.
A little bit about your life after the war.
Okay.
And what were some of your major events after the war until now?
When I left the service, I went into residency at Baylor College of Medicine. It happened to be in Houston, in the urology department, and it was one of the top 5 in the country, and I was fortunate to be there. And then I grew up in Houston, and I went into practice in Houston. And then since then, you know, my wife is very special to me. We've raised these children, and it's been I feel very personally very grateful for what I have. All right, and that's where I am today.
And would you consider the second trip to Vietnam a good closure to your years back in the 60s that you were here?
Yeah, I think that that's very important. That I have to bring it to a close, and this is enough. And in Houston, I do some volunteer work for an organization called Veterans Journey Home. There are a lot of veterans who come home with post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Exactly.
And we have weekend retreats for these guys, for them to tell their story. And the way they tell it, it's unbelievable. But that 3 days of just letting it out with their buddies, that changes their whole life to do that. And I will tell you that I'm sure, even the soldiers, the Vietnamese soldiers, when your buddy gets killed, you don't forget that.
Exactly.
You know, it just never leaves you, and it can cause trouble if you don't speak up. Don't let it go. Don't keep it a secret. Talk to your wife. Tell her. I'll just tell you one quick story.
Okay.
One of the veterans was talking about from Vietnam when his squad was burning down a village, and they were on the last hooch, and it was being burned down. There were 2 children inside that hooch, and both of them died. He heard them crying. Now, when he came back to the United States, every time he heard a child cry, he'd have to go outside the building. I don't care where he was. He had to leave the building and go outside. Mm-hmm. And he has 3 daughters. So when his daughters were, babies, they cried, he probably had to go outside of his house.
Exactly.
So he told that story, that's gut-wrenching, and then he sent a telegram to everybody, thanking them for listening to his story, that it gave him a lot of relief, and that as soon as he got home, he called his 3 daughters and took them out to dinner.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
But I can just see, I can visualize his experience at the time it took place here, in this country, in that village.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, for me, it's this event has given me a tremendous amount of relief. Mm-hmm. And in my deepest heart, because I feel so strongly we shouldn't have been here, that all those people who died, and I keep saying, for what? You got to think about that. You have to think. I have to think about it, and I just don't think it was necessary. And that's the way I am today. But in terms of these events with Hung, mm-hmm. all I got to do is think about yesterday, mm-hmm. and everything else don't matter.
Everything else doesn't matter. That's great. So my final question would be, what can veterans on both sides actively do to basically reconcile, to further understand each other and reconcile after the war?
I think that if the veterans organizations here, and somehow or another the veterans organizations in the United States could find a way to have a common convention and have somebody, an expert there at the convention, and bring them together and let them have closure. Both of them. Mm-hmm. All right, because I really think that at Vietnam, as time goes on, with the amount of industry that's here and how all the other countries are really desiring to do business with Vietnam, and all of a sudden the communications between the United States and Vietnam has gotten better.
Just got better.
All right, then they should take advantage of that. All right. Mm-hmm. It would be a big-time healing process, and the United States could be part of that.
Exactly.
And I know some people, and I'm going to, now that we talk about it and you've asked other questions, mm-hmm. when I go back, I'm going to give it some thought of how to work on that. It'll be like a project for me.
Oh, it's going to be a new project for you.
A new project,
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It will be, and this is special.
Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad that it's Vietnam related, because your last project was also Vietnam related.
Yeah, this
is
special. Oh no, I got some thoughts about this, and I've been thinking about it this whole year.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you so much, Dr.
Anyway,
Sam Axelrad, for being with us on our show today.
Thank
and
you.
I'm really, really excited to hear more about your new project that's Vietnam related.
Yeah, you started. Yeah, and I want to thank you for inviting us here.
Thank you so much.
It's a real pleasure and honor to be part of this.
Mm-hmm. It's a pleasure and honor to be able to meet you and hear your stories. So thank you so much for sharing with us your stories. And
stay well.
Oh, thank you. You too.
Okay.
Thank you too. I think your stories are so inspiring, and I think it's a living proof of how humanity exists right during wartime and how deep it can still be right here decades after peacetime. So
there's more to do.
Much. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on Talk Vietnam this time, and until next time that we talk, take care and goodbye.